Hello everyone and welcome to PPiAI, and today we are going to be learning about basic input and output in files and folders and how you can leverage that in Python, right? So what is input and output? So input is what the user is providing to a software, and inputs are basically ways to accept information from the user, whereas output is to provide information back to the user, right? And your software that you write in Python basically acts as the in-between, where it processes the inputs that are given to it and provides the desired output, right? So if we remember from the print function, right? So a print function takes the input of a string or any other variable, right? And whatever you put inside of it will be printed out in the command line as the output, right? So it basically takes the input and displays it as it is as the output. Now, there are also ways in which you can get input directly from the user, right? So inputs can be accepted from the user using the input function in Python. So the input function stops the execution of code and gives control of program to the user, right? So the user is prompted to enter the data, and once the user enters the data, the control returns to the program, and the function input returns the data in the form of a string, right? So let's have a look at a quick example of all of this. All right, so let's call the variable input from user. We'll give it the value of input, right? So we write input first, and then we can write a prompt, right? So let's say we say enter your name, and then we can say print input from user. So now let's try to run this code and see what happens. Right? So as you can see over here, we get enter your name, and after that we have a cursor in which we can actually type now, right? So let's say I type this out and I press enter, and then it uses the print statement to print out this variable. So what happens here is you're able to take input directly from the user and use it in your print statement, right? And now we can do other things as well, right? So once, let's say I've printed out the name, let's say we want to get their age, right? Enter your age, right? And whatever you get as the answer from input is stored as a string, right? So it will always be a string, but you can convert it to a number if you want, right? So we can say, oh, actually, let's make this variable age input from user to differentiate it from this variable, right? Now what we can say is we can create another variable, let's call it age, and convert this value into an integer, right? And then we can print it back out, or let's make it a little more complex. So we can do a bunch of if statements. Let's say if age is less than 18, say print 18, and then let's say we want to do elif age greater than equal to 18. So 18, we'll do print adult, right? Now let's try to run this piece of code. So again, it will first ask me for my name. I'll give it my name. Then I press enter. After I press enter, it give me my name, and then it jumped to the other input statement, right? Now here, let me enter my age. And as you can see, it did the calculation corresponding to here. And I'll let you go through that code for a second, but it basically determined that I'm an adult, right? And printed that information out to me. Now, if I do this again, right? And this time, let's make the age 12. As you can see, it will say teen, right? Because that's how we programmed it. We can make it more refined where we can say if age is less than 13, you can say, okay, you rent kid, right? And we can make this an elif statement, and that will be more accurate, I guess. But you can basically understand from here how you can use the input statement in your piece of code and how you can manipulate it to be used in your code, right? Any questions so far? All right, let's go back to the presentation. So input via user, this is what we were doing, right? This always gives us the output as a string, right? And then we can use this string in our code. We can convert it to another type if we really want to. And we can basically take any kind of input from the user, which can be converted to a string, right? Input can also be read from files using the open function, right? So the open function takes two parameters, file name and mode. File name, it is the path of the file in system along with file name and its extension. And the mode, so the mode can be any of these four, right? So the first mode is R. This only reads the file. Then we have A, which will append data to the file and create the file if it does not exist. Then we have the write function, which writes the file, writes into the file from the very start and creates the file if it does not exist. And then we have lastly the X method, which creates the file and returns an error if it exists. So input via files. Open is generally preceded by with keyword to handle file operations easily, right? Read lines, this function creates a list of each line in the file, and then read will read the entire file and return the text. I would recommend you always use read lines and not read, because read will be very slow if the file is huge, and it will try to store everything in one variable, which can cause some issues, right? So let's have a look at how we can open our own file and start reading, right? So in this same folder, let me create a new text file. Let me call it input file.txt. And in here, let me write a few lines. So say hello world, hello again, right? So now I'll save this file and go to our main function, right? Let me get rid of all of this. Now I start with the with keyword, right? And after with, we write open, and then we can write the name of the file, right? So if you want to mention a file that is not in the same folder, you will have to give the entire path, right? But for our purposes, it is in the same folder, so we can get away with just writing the file name. Right? And then we have to specify the method. So in our case, we'll do read, and then we do as, right? And then we'll create a variable. Let's call it file obj to match it to the presentation. Now using this file object, right, I can create a data structure called lines and say file object dot read lines. Right? This is the function we were mentioning earlier. And just for fun, let's also do line equals file object dot. Yeah. Now we'll print lines and also print line. See the difference between both. All right. So as you can see, we only got this answer and this one has been seen as empty. So what happened here was because we already use read lines, it reached the end of the file by the time it got here and there was nothing left for this line to read, right? So if we want to see the difference, we'll have to comment these lines out. So as you can see, line stores the entire thing as a string because we use the read function, right? So with the read function, the entire text file gets put into the variable as a string. But when we use the read lines function, it creates a data structure which has each of the lines as individual strings, right? So this is what we would prefer to do. As you can see over here, we have our two lines in the form of a list. Now, what you could potentially do is you could do for line in lines, right? And iterate through each of the lines and then manipulate them individually. So let's say I want to print line, right? Now it will look more like the text file we just saw, right? Because we're going through each of the line individually. Any questions in reading a file? Okay, so what exactly do you want me to repeat? So basically what we're doing, okay, so basically what we're doing here is we're creating a text file, right? We're calling it input file.txt. These are the contents. When we use the open function, we can open this text file, right? And right now we're using the read method, right? So we're reading the file. Now this file will be denoted by our file object, right? So we do with open as and then the name of the file object. Then inside we can basically create our variable called lines, which will have all of these lines in a list, right? So if I do print lines, this is our list which contains each of the lines as a string, right? So which part do you need more clarity in?
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I actually do not understand the whole section for this particularly. I don't know if you can just begin for the beginning, please. Sorry.
Okay. Basically what we're doing here once again is we're taking a text file, right? We have these contents in here. Then in the Python file, what we're doing is we're opening this file, right? Input file.txt. We're opening it using the open function in read mode. And we're reading through the file. And then we're going through each of the lines individually by using the read lines function on the file object, right? And then we're storing it in a variable called lines. And when we print out lines, we can see the contents, which is a list of all the lines in that file, right? So if we look at that file again, so you can see this is a list of all the lines. So once again, which part exactly is not clear?
Okay, I understand it now. More like we are just reading the files from the input file into this to print it out.
Yeah, basically. So right now, we are just printing it out, but you could potentially do whatever you want with the text file, right? So for example,
Okay.
if you have a 100-line text file that you want to use in your code and just go through it, you can do that.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. So let's go back to our presentation. All right. So next up we have our write and append methods, right? So let's have a look at the append method first. So that is here on the left. So the append method basically allows us to add text to the end of our file, right? So we can add more text to the end of our file. We can add new lines. The older text will still be in there. We are not replacing that. We're just adding text to the end. So let's have a look. So this file is already created. We'll just use this file again. So let me get rid of all of this. So once again, we start with the with keyword, right? Then we write the open function. First, we have the file name, just like we did in read mode, right? So input file.txt, right? And then with this time, we'll open it in append mode, right? Then we write the keyword as, followed by the name of our file object. We'll name it file obj. So now in here, what we can do is, instead of instead of reading lines, we can write lines in here, right? So how do we do that? We can basically say file object dot write, and then what we can do here is we can say hello from the Python code, and then let's put a new line character at the end. So this slash n is nothing but an enter key, right? So this is the same as an enter key. So after this, if I write hello again, you'll see what I mean. So now if I run this code, you'll see nothing comes on the output window. But if I've opened my input text file, now you'll see this got appended to the end. And because we did not put a new line before the hello, it got appended to the same line, right? And as you can see, after we wrote the word code, we had the new line character. So that's why after code, we went into a new line, right? Any questions in appending? All right. So next up, we'll have the write method. So for the write method, let's actually create a new file, right? And before we do that, let's read in all our lines from the input file again. And just for clarity, I'm going to do this. So let's open our file. Let me say input file.txt in read mode, right? As file object. Then we'll put everything in the lines variable once again. Say file object dot read lines. Okay. Now we'll create a new file by simply writing out its name, right? So let's call this one output file.txt, and this one we'll open in write mode as file object. So now what we'll do in here is we'll do file object dot write. Let's say we are inside the new file line at the end. And if I run this code, as you'll see, in our folder, we now have output file.txt, and it has one line inside which says we are inside the new file, right? And I can keep writing stuff in here. But what I want to do next is I want to use the write lines function. And in the write lines function, what you can do is you can, inside here, you can basically provide it with your data structure that you used for over here, right? So you can read in input from one file and then put it into the other file, right? So if I run this code, as you can see, everything from input file.txt got stored in our output file, right? So basically we did a very fancy way of doing a copy paste, basically, if that makes sense. Is this clear to everyone? All right. So another thing I just want to note here is that, so let's say I remove all of this, and let's say I open the input file again. But this time in write mode as file object. And let's say in here I do file object dot write. These are new. Now let's have a look at input file. Right? This is the contents of input file before I run that Python code. Now let's go to that Python code and run it. As you can see, the write function erases everything in the file and starts over, right? So this is different from the append method in a way that it completely erases everything. And in the append method, it puts everything at the end of the file. Okay, so let's go back to our presentation. All right, so files and folders. Sometimes it is required to read and write into multiple files that are present in directory or subdirectories. With the current knowledge of Python, we will write the path of every file and perform the operation for each of them. What to do in case there are hundreds of folders and thousands of files inside of them, right? So to do this, Python provides an easy way to iterate through folders and subfolders using the library called OS, right? And the way you can use this library is simply by writing import OS as your first line in your code, right? So we'll have a look at this in just a second. So to iterate through all the files and folders in a directory, including subdirectory and subfolder, use os.walk, right? So let's say I want to do this. We'll go back to our PyCharm window. All right. So let's have a look at this. So first we do import OS. Okay. Once we've done that, we do os dot walk. Right? Oh, sorry. So basically, os dot walk will give us three variables, right? So what we can do is we can denote each of them for file, sorry, for group folders, files in os dot walk. And then for our purposes, I'll just use this directory. So this is the directory we're currently in, right? which we can look at by just hovering over here. Right. Now in here, let's just print these out for now. So now if I run this code, nothing happened. Interesting. Okay. Give me a second here. So let me get the actual name of the directory instead of using this. So, right. So I found this random folder. I'm going to get its info and copy it over in just a second. Okay, I'm not quite sure why this is not working. Copy path slash reference. Okay, so here we get the absolute path. So once again, if you want to look at the steps, you can go here, click on copy path slash reference, and then copy the absolute path from here. So this is what I was missing. All right. So if we try this now, hopefully it should work. Yeah, there we go. So this gives us everything inside our folder, right? So let's have a look at the top. So here we can see our venv folder, right? And then inside this venv folder, we can see our bin and lib folders, right? And then inside those, we can see all the various details within that. And I'll let you have a look at this os.walk yourself as well once. But this is basically how you can get it to start working, right? So basically once again, what os.walk basically does is, if you give it a folder, it will return three variables to you, which will be the root, folders, and files, right? And it will keep iterating through those, and you will see them displayed in your output window if you print them out, right? So what OS library also allows us to do is see if something exists, right? So if you provide it a path and you try to check if it exists, it will give you the answer, right? So again, once I'll let you do this example on your own. This is not really that important, I would say. So this R over here is what we use to include the backslash, right? And if you use double quotation marks, it doesn't really matter that much. Yeah, so I would say command prompt would probably be a better use case for this, right? This is simply if you want to do it using Python. Command prompt, sorry, command line arguments are much more powerful for achieving the same, like similar results. And that's a good question. Yeah. So what if we need to replace a string with another and create a new file? So replace and open can be used at the same time within the same loop, right? So down here, you can see when we do with open as, we can actually open two files simultaneously and work on them simultaneously, right? So if we have a look at my earlier example, so this one we could have done in just one loop instead. So let's have a look at what that would look like. I'll copy this over, right? And then this file underscore obj needs to be a different name so that it doesn't clash with this one. So I'll call it out file obj, right? Copy this over here, say out underscore file obj, out underscore file obj. I'm going to just pause here for a second. My uh, power doesn't seem to be connected. Just give me a second. So power is back. All right. So now we can get rid of all of this, right? And if we run this, it will actually take care of this within the same loop, right? So this was the input file, and this is what we get into the output file, right? And this is what we were already printing out. So it gives us the same result, but we are able to do it within the same loop. So this is more efficient and slightly faster, right? So these are some additional resources. Once again, W3 schools will always be a top recommendation, but there's other resources in here as well. All right. And the assignment related to this, I will be releasing at some point today. And I'm still working through the Google Drive issue. Has anybody still tried after that? Have they been able to upload assignments yet? Uh, Video links for Zoom are not working. It's saying it's the wrong password. That's weird. Okay, I'll have a look at those again, see if they're not working. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Any questions from the lecture? Any other doubts I can clarify? If not, I'm gonna stop recording.
Okay, I think someone was asking